First, I want to thank you, Michelle, so much for giving me the honor of speaking here tonight, because I'm speaking on behalf of so many in our nation. A few weeks ago, Michelle also gave me an opportunity to speak and give a few brief remarks at the Monteagle Memorial Day tribute, and for that I was very appreciative. For millions of families across the nation, that Memorial Day, just like Veterans Day, is every day. It is not just one day out of the year. I would like to begin by taking a moment to recognize anyone in this room who is a veteran. And would you please stand if you're here? Okay, now what I'd like to do is, if you are a family member of a veteran, would you please stand? I personally salute each one of you, and I thank you for being here tonight. In a recent news release, Fox News reported, and I'm going to read it here, it says, Congress is turning up the heat on President Obama to cut the backlog of Veterans Affairs disability claims, which have gone up by 2,000%, while the agency's budget has increased 40% over the last 4 years. I understand from research today that he contributed over $40 billion and yet has had no results. If anything, it's gotten worse. A bipartisan group of House lawmakers is the latest to call upon the president to be more aggressive, and sending a letter last week, they asked him, take direct action. Brian Williams of the NBC Nightly News, he stated, and I'll quote, this nation has launched and fought 2 wars over the past decade, but for the millions who have served with distinction, their country is supposed to live up to its side of the bargain and provide benefits as a condition of their service. It is estimated that by the end of next month, more than 1 million veterans will have filed new claims for disability benefits with the Veterans Affairs, and they'll all have to wait in line. The VA claims backlog has become intolerable and has been labeled a national disgrace. It is important to remember when I speak tonight that this critical VA claims backlog is not a Democratic issue, it is not a Republican issue, it is an American issue. What the media fails to mention is that the horrific VA claims backlog is not just an issue following the last 2 wars that this nation has launched in the past decade. It also includes the Vietnam War and many other wars. I would like to introduce myself. I am VA file number XC 2891810, U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claim docket number 08475. For the past 17 years, just like for thousands of veterans and their families, I am only a file number to the Veterans Administration's claim system. I do not have a name. My husband of 16 years, the father of our 3 young children, served as a Navy Seabees construction battalion in Vietnam in the late 60s. In January 1987, when our children were only 2, 4, and 6 years old, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. His oncologist at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, which is where we lived, told me over the phone and with no warning whatsoever, oh, by the way, he's got 2 years to live. He lived for 9. Our lives as we knew it and dreamed of suddenly disappeared forever. My husband's death on July 17, 1996 was certified by the VA as service-related due to exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. However, the years of experimental chemotherapy treatments, which included interferon shots, which is chemo, that I gave to my husband daily for years, resulted in my family losing my husband and my children's father emotionally and physically before his final death, following a failed bone marrow transplant. My husband's increasing mental and physical decline, which included years of serious events and circumstances that our young children and I endured and detailed in documents submitted to the VA claim system over and over again for 17 years, were witnessed by many, including a child psychologist named Dr. Carolyn Schroeder, who was brought in to help our young children cope with their father's terminal illness. As a result of my husband's erratic and unpredictable behavior, again, brought on largely by the experimental chemotherapy, it was not him, it was a result of his experimental drugs, I was encouraged by Dr. Schroeder to relocate our young children to safety in August of 1993. I also had to leave my job at the Chancellor's office at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, which I love very much. Dr. Schroeder stated in her medical assessment that was submitted to the VA claims system, and I quote, in part, "Over the course of his disease and treatment, he changed from a loving, caring, and compassionate person to one who was clinically depressed and exhibited erratic and unpredictable behavior, including verbal and physical abuse of his wife. The children were often witnesses to this behavior and at times put them in potentially dangerous situations." I assure you, there's a lot more to that story. One of my husband's oncologists, Dr. James F. Smith Jr., stated in his medical assessment, in part, that he had a severe psychiatric decompensation which lasted until the end of his life. Following my husband's death in 1996, and with 3 young children to raise alone, I filed for my VA DIC spousal benefits, only to learn that a person from Oregon who was living with him briefly had filed for my benefits with false information immediately after my husband's death. This person had also submitted a fraudulent divorce decree in the VA DIC application. It was dated 72 days before my husband's death, at a time when he was on his deathbed and disabled. When I first brought this person's fraudulent submission of my VA DIC spousal benefits to the attention of the VA regional office in Portland, their response to me was, "We have too many cases similar to yours. We do not get involved. You will have to fight your VA claim system with a private attorney." That was in 1996. Unlike the requirements mandated by the Social Security Administration nationwide, the VA claim system did not even bother to verify the documents of the application and the false documents submitted. The one critical document dated just 72 days before my husband's death should have been a red flag to someone at the VA. When I brought the official VA ruling for VA certified Agent Orange deceased victims' spousal benefits, which states, and I quote, this is if you're eligible, "Spousal benefits are granted if separation occurred due to the veteran's misconduct without fault on your part." To the attention of the VA claims representative, they did not even know to what I was referring. When I detailed additional and unquestionable VA legal violations, the VA claims representative again were clueless. The horrific circumstances which resulted in my 3 young children and I being forced to relocate to Georgia in August of 1993 have been detailed and confirmed repeatedly in medical assessments, support letters, and documents submitted to the Georgia VA Regional Office in Atlanta for over 15 years, and to the Board of Veterans Appeals hearing, which I had a hearing in Washington, D.C. in 2008. The Veterans Administration did not care. Our 3 young children and I were just a number. The VA has simply moved our file from one desk to another. In the summer of 2007, after paying a large amount of legal fees, our oldest son and I traveled to Chapel Hill for a court hearing that I personally had to request. On December the 2nd of 2008, my Chapel Hill, North Carolina attorney called to tell me that the North Carolina courts had ruled the fraudulent divorce decree filed by that person in Oregon null and void. I was elated. I said, "Oh my goodness, finally, the VA claim system will finally make right their blatant mistake and absence of legal judgment that made the loss of my husband and my children's father even more painful for years." I was very wrong. The 2008 court ruling was submitted to the VA claim system. In April of 2008, I flew to Washington, D.C., and I had a hearing before the Board of Veterans Appeals. Prior to the hearing, the DAV, which is the Disabled American Veteran Representative, who attended the meeting with me in Washington, he reviewed my file, and he sat me down and he said to me, and I quote, "The VA regional office in Atlanta really dropped the ball in your claim. With my experience, it is my strong guess that they will never admit it." As we walked down the hall to the hearing, he further stated to me, "You do know what the VA's unwritten policy is, don't you?" And I said, "No." And he looked at me and he said, "The VA's unwritten policy is stall, deny, and hope they die." On July 22nd of 2008, following the Board of Veterans Appeals hearing in Washington, D.C., I received another denial for my DIC spousal benefits. In September of 2008, after 15 years in the office of the president of a public college, I also lost my job because I had finally put in objections to crossing unquestionable ethical and fiscal lines requested by the president of the college. This dramatic event was another life-changing event and made my long and difficult battle with the VA claim system even more stressful for my young children and I, because they depended on me only. It has now been 17 years since I first began filing countless VA DIC spousal benefit claims, forms, documents, faxes, obtaining medical assessments, attending legal proceedings in Chapel Hill, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and sending hundreds of emails and faxes to VA officials and legislators asking them to please address the unquestionable, fraudulent, illegal, and horrific injustice our family has suffered, which continues today, still unresolved. I ask you to each take a moment and put yourself in my position. What would you do if faced with the same injustice and indifference by the VA claim system after losing your spouse of 16 years, the father of your 3 young children, from exposure to Agent Orange that was certified by the VA service-related? 2 years later, in 2010, after much research, I obtained a very highly regarded law firm in Bethesda, Maryland called Bergman & Moore. They take cases they know they can only win legally. They took mine. They submitted an appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims in Washington, D.C. on my behalf. On September 3rd of 2010, my VA attorney from Bergman & Moore called and said, "We have just received notice that the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims in Washington, D.C. has ruled for a joint motion for vacating and remanding the board decision. This is extremely rare. In other words, I won." In other words, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims vacated and remanded the years and years of denials from the Board of Veterans Affairs and for my claim, for my benefits. My attorney further stated that, again, that it is very, very rare. The actual statement on page 4 of the joint motion from the U.S. Court of Appeals states, in part, "Wherefore the parties respectfully move the court for an order vacating and remanding the 2008 board decision." It further states, finally, the board must provide expedited treatment of this case. My family's story is just one example of the VA claim system noncompliance to expedited treatment ruled by the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. I have asked Congressman Scott DesJarlais and Senator Janice Boland to assist in scheduling me to speak before any VA Affairs Committee in Nashville, in Washington. I want to educate the VA members about the realities. Among my questions to members of the Veterans Affairs Committees would be, who enforces compliance by the state VA regional offices following motions for remands by both the Board of Veterans Affairs and the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims in Washington? And why are VA applications and documents not given the same scrutiny and verification required by the Social Security Administration? The Veterans Administration's failure to verify applications and fraudulent documents submitted, disregard for documents confirming the fact, and lack of education by the VA claims representatives on the laws, and total noncompliance to rulings by the Board of Veterans Appeals and the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims in Washington represents our country's increasing national disgrace and indifference to the sacrifices of so many veterans and their families that they have made for our country's freedom. My family is just one example of many.